Housing's an absolute must for societies. The obvious part is that people do need a roof over their head. But the other aspects of housing that people often don't consider are that it's very difficult to go to school if you don't have a home. If people are constantly moving, they can't have consistent schooling. It's a real problem. It's also the case that if you're trying to provide ongoing health care around a chronic disease, if somebody's homeless, having to move from place to place all the time is very difficult to have your health care work. Simple matters, if you're in a job and you don't have a place to call a home, it's very difficult to clean yourself, to have clean clothes the next day for work. It's easy to lose jobs when people don't have the right approach to their own cleanliness. So homes are absolutely necessary for health, for education, for the roof over one's head. As to why there are shortages of housing in so many societies, India being one of them, one of many, I think it's a matter of priority. I don't believe that people should be given housing, but I think that the real challenge is how do we find satisfaction for everybody in societies? And if the challenge in becoming satisfied in life is how do we serve, I think there are millions of people across the world with resources who'd be more satisfied with their lives if they actually focused on things like helping everybody to have housing. No, I don't think everybody ought to be given housing, even by wealthier individuals. But much like programs that we both know of here in India, where people are asked to work alongside others, volunteers working with those who might end up owning a home, that's the type of program that can lead to really meaningful housing programs in societies with government help, with CSR, with businesses that are asking their employees to go out and volunteer, with charitable organizations, NGOs. If they all work together, I think that there can be a real dent in that problem of more than 20 million people in this country not having homes. I think it's important to look at these different markets, real estate and investing in operating businesses, in two different ways. Often real estate is used for purposes in a lot of developing countries for a variety of purposes. Sometimes it's for real estate development, sometimes it's for cleaning money. I guess the terms used here are black money, it turns into white money. But that's a very different situation than when people are investing in businesses. I believe that the point that you've made, though, about having to do good due diligence and really understanding the local conditions is pertinent to whether you're talking about operating businesses or real estate. I do believe that there'll be a lot of foreign money that comes into India to invest in operating businesses that will not be smart money. And some people are going to be pleased with the outcomes and other people are going to be displeased. And I think that the outcomes will be both financial and social, and there'll be a lot of excitement about some of the social impact, and there'll be disappointment on that front, and there'll be other people who are excited about their financial returns and others that are disappointed. But your point about how doing your due diligence and really understanding the local conditions is key is the correct point to make. I think the important thing to remember is that the impact investment community can measure itself in a number of different ways. A number of years ago, JP Morgan Chase and some others did an estimate of the total market size being $1 trillion US dollars. They came back just a few years later, and because they wanted to measure impact investment in more particular ways, they said the market was 10 times smaller over a 10-year period, only worth $100 billion. My personal estimate, when you look at all the wealth in the world, somewhere over 300 trillion, of which probably 70 trillion is in equity, there's probably at least 40 or 50 trillion, maybe 60 trillion worth of businesses out there in terms of the worth of them that are impactful businesses. And I think it's almost easier to say what's not impactful and then to say why. Certain types of weapons I don't think are particularly impactful in a positive way. Certain types of housing, if it's just for the wealthy and you're only producing low-income jobs, I'm not sure that's as impactful as it could be. But almost all manufacturing jobs across the world, all knowledge jobs, I think are impact jobs. And I think the main measurement that we really ought to be making about impact businesses is whether they're creating good jobs. Now, the whole CSR movement, I think, has lost the interest of many young people. And I think many times it's because it's focused more on conversation rather than actually getting things done in communities. And this is really the challenge from my perspective for the impact investment community. How do we move beyond talk? How do we actually get jobs created? How do we worry less about all the myriad of measurements that can be made? And how do we focus on the key issue, which is that good jobs are created for individuals and families? How does that help people move forward in their lives? Well, I think it's important that we not criticize each other. There are a lot of fabulous people in the impact investment world who are trying to do a good job, and I think their hearts are in the right places. At the same time, once measurement starts, it's very difficult to stop it. And you can look at some of the measurement systems that are being created right now, and not only from the complexity perspective, but from the cost perspective, you see some people, I think, going too far. I've known of some businesses that ended up seeing a significant percentage, in some cases even half of the total profit of a company would be used up to measure its impact. Well, I think the money should have gone to the employees. In fact, I think if there's a second measurement beyond creating good employment, what we ought to be measuring is whether employees are becoming owners of the companies. And one of the easiest ways to see the value of this is when these impact companies are sold. If they're sold to somebody who doesn't have any interest in impact, they're not as impactful anymore. Well, if they're sold to the employees, that's where the wealth is actually created in the world. If they're the owners of the company, you're having real impact because lower income people are becoming owners of assets that actually create wealth for them. I think the real question should be, what do people do with their money when they make it? And if they simply spend it all on themselves and don't give back to society, that, I think, is the greater crime than making profit. There are some industries that I think if you make profit in them, it doesn't matter whether it's big profit or small profit. And we ought to talk about what industries that are just shameful. Prostitution is an industry that is huge, and it's shameful. I think that trafficking of any kind, whether that's bringing other types of labor other than prostitutes into a country or into a city, is a shame. And that we ought to do all we can to make sure that the people who are in those industries taking advantage of people are stopped. I think there's some interesting questions about interest rates on loans. In my country, the United States, and the country I live in, the United Kingdom, there have been payday loans, which are very high interest rates, often going above 200%, sometimes even going as high as 2,000%. Those types of interest rates need to be discussed. In some cases, I think they ought to be illegal. In other cases, I think there ought to be real attempts made through credit unions or community banks to provide alternative loans to people who are in desperate situations. So I don't think the only question is whether or not there should be profit related to businesses that have the poor as customers. I think the bigger issues are, how should you never make money, and how should you spend your money? I think this relates back to how do people find satisfaction in their lives? And if they're spending their resources, if they're investing their resources, if they're granting their resources in productive ways, I think people with money actually have much more satisfied lives.